So we're talking about a little bit of coaches with the MLFB, but like we talked about a little bit earlier, coaching staffs, all the coaching staffs, mind you, for the USFL.
They dropped this one on us. Really, it's kind of everything coming in today.
Yeah.
So as we're talking, there's been some that are revealed via interviews. There's been some good snooping, like the folks over at USFL Newsroom or Network. They actually, one of their guys, I believe it's Aces, one of the Pocket Aces. I was about to say Aces Up. That's not it. Pocket Aces, who helps with that. He helped get the Gamblers staff together. But the USFL dropped him officially via press release today.
One real quick other shout out too to the Breakers Insiders group on Instagram, because they brought us. I mean, they got the mother load with that Larry Fedora leak, tip my hat, my lady style. Brought us all that Breakers coaching staff earlier this week. But sorry to divert, as you were saying. The USFL now made it official. I just wanted to give him his credit as well.
Well, you got to give credit where credit's due. I'm not gonna knock you for stopping me for that. I think that's very much worth the shout out. So glad for Breakers Insiders there getting that all sorted out. Community definitely reaching out. Some of these guys have been a lot open with terms of giving some details depending on how they trust. So we got the whole shebang. You know what? And I guess, do you want to go through staff by staff? List off?
Yeah, we'll alternate. You want to start with the staff? Do you have the press release in front of you?
I have the Fox Sports list up. That is what I'm going on.
Okay, so what do you have? You have Stallions up first. They did them in alphabetical?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Do you want to start
we'll
there?
Alphabetical.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. So Stallions, we got, of course, Skip Holtz as the head coach, but he's also listed as the offense coordinator and QBs. Something we saw with this, and it kind of fits the theme of how these teams are being built. There is condensing of positions as well. So Holtz is doing the OC duties and the QB duties besides just being the head coach. So you'll see a few of those as we go down the list. So Skip Holtz, head coach, offensive coordinator, and QBs. His staff includes John Chavis, defensive coordinator, as well as linebackers coach. Jonathan Heimbach, offensive line. Mike Jones, wide receiver. Larry Kirksey, hey, good to see you, buddy. Running backs coach. Bill Johnson is defensive line. Corey Chamberlain is defensive backs.
So moving over to my team, at least for now, the Houston Gamblers. Of course, we knew Kevin Sumlin, he's the head coach, but he's also the quarterback coach here as well. David Beatty, wide receivers coach. Tim Lewis. And we're going to go through some of the call-outs here, but another kind of interesting name for the Spring League. Defensive coordinator, defensive backs coach. Greg McMahon, no relation to Vince. Special teams, tight ends. Gordon Shaw, offensive line. Mark Schneider, linebackers coach. Ty Warren, defensive line. Now, we got a couple assistants in there as well. Brendan Donovan, defensive quality control. James Ronald, running backs assistant in there. Again, solid so far.
Yes, here we go. Funny, we get both of our teams to list off. I get the Panthers here. So, of course, you knew Jeff Fisher was going to be head coach in this whole shebang. He is listed as only head coach on here. A little more bare bones from his staff. So, offensive coordinator is Eric Marty. Defensive coordinator is Daniel Carroll. Special teams defensive backs coach is Jim Amamura. Neil Calloway is the offensive line. Quan Drake is defensive line. And you have team assistants, of course, for the Panthers, which will be Tony Brown, defensive line, Mark Stewart, running backs. Fisher's listed as head coach. I'm curious. I'm assuming that you're going to have some shared duties for maybe like linebackers or a few other the positions. Again, this is a little more bare bones for his listed off, but that is your Michigan Panthers coaching staff. Up next for Stefan to list is the New Jersey Generals.
Now, I will say one quick point on the Panthers. It is interesting. I would say he probably went with the youngest group of coaches. Jeff Fisher there, kind of maybe serving as a little bit of a mentor situation. So I do like to see that before we jump into the Generals.
A lot of smaller school guys. Yeah. That's something I saw too. Like got ones from like Grambling State coming up into here as well. Folks that definitely, the only one that I could find that was connected directly with them was actually Amamura from his time with the St. Louis and Los Angeles Rams days. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, a lot of these guys, several of these are come ups or ones that maybe are not as well connections as like, say, Mike Riley's staff, for example.
Right.
Here.
So, we have Mike Riley coming as head coach, dual duty here. Robert Diaco, defensive line coach. Chris Dishman, defensive coordinator, defensive backs coach. Jay Lockey, I apologize, tight ends, running backs coach. James Rogers Jr., wide receiver. Steve Smith, offensive coordinator, offensive line. Ken Watson, linebackers coach. Now we have a couple assistants as well. Zarek Rollins, quality control and quarterbacks assistant. Dominique Franks, quality control, defensive backs assistant. And we talked about the Generals connection, at least when some of these names leaked out 2-3 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And this is one that Mike Riley, it almost feels like he went out of his way to make sure that he has a little bit of history with each one of these coaches in one way or another. Some going as far back as his playing time in high school, which, I mean, that's crazy if you ask me. Right. But then that takes us over to the Breakers, my man tipping his hat over there. So I'll tip it over to you.
Yeah, I know. Several of these already got broke early, and we've talked about a few of these on previous shows as well. But I will go through them, of course, as we have before. So Larry Fedora listed as your head coach of course, your New Orleans Breakers. Meanwhile, Nathan Burton, secondary coach. So we have him lined up. Your offensive coordinator, quarterbacks. This one was already listed off and was broken earlier. Noel Mazzone, already listed as coordinator and quarterbacks. Paul Spicer, defensive line coach. We have Jonathan Tenuta, who is defensive coordinator, linebackers. Jim Turner, offensive line coach. Patrick Washington is wide receivers. Then you have team assistant here that include Matt Butterfield, special teams and tight ends, and Greg Patrick, defensive line, listed off for your New Orleans Breakers.
And I get the duty. I get the Philadelphia Stars here. But I think I practiced enough to where I can make my way through without making some major mistakes. But of course, the one we've all known, Bart Andrus, head coach, Martin Bayless, cornerbacks, special teams, Marcel Belfay, wide receivers coach.
There you go.
Jaginski, close enough. Offensive line coach. Brandon McGuire, defensive line. Brad Miller, defensive coordinator. Glenn Smith, tight ends. Couple assistants. Brock Olivo, I apologize. Offensive quality control, running backs assistants. And on defensive quality control, we have George Jackson taking you over to Pittsburgh.
Yeah. So you're seeing here also, guys, everyone's got different titles and such right. Too, of course. That's one thing. I mean, coaching staffs, that's how they line up. Everybody's got a different setup and scheme. But I found this fascinating so far as we're going down the list. Like, some jobs, I expect like some positions to be listed off, but I think some they're just consolidating into like coordinator spots.
Oh, sure.
As we're seeing, like, again, going to the Panthers, very bare bones one. Just coordinator, a few position specialty coaches, but nothing too fancy. Meanwhile, though, as we're talking for the Maulers, definitely a filled up roster of folks here. Kirby Wilson listed off as your head coach, but I'm going to be honest, he's probably going to be talking to the running backs. Guy has a history of it. Just if you don't, folks that don't remember, that is kind of his expertise. But let's go into everyone else that he's got signed on. So Rick Courtright, defensive line coach, and a few of these were already listed off in other leaks via interview that he had as well. So, for example, Jaron Horton, you already knew him. We mentioned him in previous discussions on here. Defensive coordinator, defensive backs from UConn, had his time in the AAF as well. Also, another one we listed off, John Tomlinson. That was a different discussion piece. That's your offense coordinator, quarterbacks coach. Other people that are signed on here for the Maulers, you got Mark Hull, Brian Kyatt, and that's the best way I'm going to pronounce that, and Steve Loney. I think it's Looney there, offensive line and tight ends for the Maulers, and assistants Will Johnson for running backs and Jack Nudo for defensive backs. Again, I'm assuming Wilson's going to help with the running backs. So just if I had to get a hunch, just not listed there.
Right on. So that leaves us, last but not least, Tampa Bay Bandits. Heading in, head coach Todd Haley. We knew that one. Frank Gans Jr., tight end, special teams. Trey Jackson, linebackers. Carnell Lake, defensive backs. Now, this one's an interesting one. Pepper Johnson, defensive coordinator, defensive line. Pat Perlis or Pearls? I apologize. Perlis, I believe, is what it is. Defensive line.
Perlis.
Bob Saunders, and he's got this is quite the roles here. Offensive coordinator, wide receiver, and running backs coach.
Yes.
A couple of assistants here. Stephen Thompson, linebacker, defensive backs assistants. and Yale Van Dyne. An interesting first name there, Yale, wide receiver and running backs assistant. Now, I'm going to segue just because we were there with Pepper Johnson. I was talking about this on Discord earlier. This could be Pepper Johnson's redemption story. I mean, the last time we heard from Pepper Johnson, he was the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Wildcats for 1 week. 1 week before Winston Moss didn't like what he saw out there. Now, I know there was some things that happened during training camp, and I don't want to say it because I don't think it was Pepper Johnson's fault, but as the defensive coach, maybe that played into it as well. Or Winston Moss is just a no BS kind of guy. One loss is one loss too many. But needless to say, I mean, he kind of got done dirty with the Wildcats, but he has a little bit of a decent pedigree here. Again, he spent time with the Patriots, Bills, Jets, and let's not forget the Memphis Express of the AAF is the linebackers coach. So I think, again, we're the Bandits. The Bandits did build a pretty solid coaching staff around Haley. And what we were mentioning, at least what I mentioned earlier, I look at somebody like a Pepper Johnson as maybe somebody that could, hopefully, at least for the Bandits, slow down the high, at least what we're expecting to see in a high-paced game. Now, we'll have to see how it all plays out here, but I would love to see that redemption story. And I mean, quite honestly, if you look at the Bandits, they're looking pretty stellar on offense with Tayamu. He's got a couple good receivers, and now on the defensive end, you have a good, solid coach with a good defensive mind in place that I think is going to be able to help these guys figure out maybe different ways to stop the offense. At least with that spring league experience, I think that always helps. But I don't know. Thoughts? Pepper Johnson is going to be a bust, or is he going to come out for the Bandits this year?
Well, I think you hope that's the best case scenario, is that he, gets a little bit of a redemption of sorts. But yeah, I mean, if you're a Bandits fan, and if you've been following the XFL and you remember that story, that'll stick out in your mind. The Wildcats were, I mean, they were kind of rough out of the gate, but I think for some of us, we were still kind of shocked back then that he was let go that quickly. I think if we're looking at the XFL, at least like 2.0, I think no one saw that coming, because it's just like, well, it's a spring league, like it's week one. No one wants to be like, oh, and there was of course other elements to that story, but I think he gets another chance here. If anything, the guy's been in this scene where you got to build up you got to be able to build up your team and what your scheme is right away. He also gets the luxury of like any outdoor football, defense gets the first step ahead, because it's easier to get that adapted and be more successful against an offense that way at the beginning. So he gets a little more leeway. As long as things don't go a disaster route week one, I don't see him getting someone being fired again. I cross my fingers for that case, but I give the guy another shot. It's at least it's a familiar name. It kind of makes people stick out and raise some eyebrows.
I think it got a good pop earlier. I think people were interested to see it. I think people were happy to see it. I think the Bandits fans were satisfied to see it. So, I mean, if that's realistically, what else can you ask for other than performing for your team, which, training camps are coming up. Hope to see it. That's what I want to see. I think the Bandits, as much as I hate to say it, they're building themselves up to be a contender, I think.
They are. Odds makers think so for sure, and I wouldn't put him past them as well. So, hey, I'll take it, and he's kind of he took a step away from professional. He was at IMG Academy for a year. So he's getting back into it, maybe gets a little time away from that, we'll find out. But again, his expertise was AAF, XFL, spring football coming out. A lot of these guys have that. So it's good to see rosters that have folks that they know it's time. You have to get up to speed. Right. I think that's a good thing to be on the same page. Is like, between the UFL, the XFL, AAF expertise, it's about getting up to speed, getting these guys set and going as quick as possible, establishing what your scheme is, what your chemistry is between players and such. So I get that. Someone that, speaking of like spring football-esque, we highlighted a few guys that stuck out. Larry Kirksey, right away, dude was the Sea Lions head coach in the TSL last year. We didn't list him off as one of the coaches we thought was going to get hired to the league. because there were some higher profile ones like Kevin Gilbride, Hal Mummy, Jerry Glanville that, they made their name and were more high profile for maybe league hirings. But, he did have some, in terms of getting like on field moments, mic'd up moments, he had some good interactions and is with a team that, I think is going to be fitting him where, he gets to be more of a player's coach, much like Skip Holtz, I think, comes off as. Again, another dude that's similar and familiar with the spring setting of getting your guys up to speed, not only the Sea Lions, but with the Dragons as well, too. Oh, yeah. Has some NFL background, is coach with the Texans. So, a little overboard. But recent head coach with this setting, I think that's a big thing that you get in terms of someone helping out in this set. Since Skip Holtz is coming from college, now you're doing a mix of pro meets like college aspect of a spring football setup. That's where this is valuable for this, I think, for Skip, is someone like that.
Oh, for sure. I think Kirksey is a perfect pickup for any of these teams. So I think Skip Holtz won out big. I mean, like you mentioned, at least last year with the Spring League and even with the XFL, he had a couple of those moments, and you could tell he cares about the team. He cares about the action that's going on the field here. And we can nail it a million times and say it over and over again, but it can never be enough. Having that, I think just the Spring League experience is huge. And you brought up the key point here is knowing how, or having the experience of just getting everybody up to speed as fast as you can. I mean, because realistically with all spring leagues, a lot of them have a short runway from training camp to kickoff. And I mean, realistically, if this league plays out the way that it looks like it's going to play out, there's going to be a lot of passing here. And so having a guy like Larry Kirksey as your wide receivers coach with, again, NFL experience, a little bit of college experience, and a good amount of spring league experience, no pun intended, with the spring league. Sure. I mean, perfect fit, solid fit. And I think, it's going to help everybody around him too. I mean, realistically, you know what the quarterback wants? A lot of wide receivers or receivers in general that just can think out of the box a little bit, have a little bit more that maybe their coaches have given them a little bit more experience than the other guys' coaches. And so I see the benefit there. Now, another, again, spring league guy, kind of a mainstay in these spring leagues that we're seeing come in as well, Tim Lewis, coming in for the Gamblers. Now, of course, he was the Birmingham Iron head coach of the AAF, and more recently, the defensive backs coach for the Seattle Dragons. And, I mean, when you look through the list of all of these coaches, all the coaching staffs, if you will, there's just a great vast array of experience. Again, we've picked out a couple ones right here that just, at least in the recent past, have worked in different spring leagues and have some professional experience. But I mean, when you look through the league, you're looking at everything from arena to World Football League to UFL, as you mentioned, NFL, college, XFL, AAF. I mean, you name the football organization, there's somebody in this coaching staff that has worked there. And I mean, there is something too working for something like an AAF that doesn't make it through the season. It's kind of the opposite of what you mentioned earlier of how do you get everything in the right place at the right time as fast as you can. I mean, you'll learn watching, 30 to 50 people have their dreams broken in front of them. And as a coach, I mean, it's not always what happens on the field, it's off the field. Realistically,
sure.
You played football. I didn't play football, but I played sports. Coaches are, a lot of them, at least in some instances, good coaches, can become a mentor for just life in general. And I don't want to get too outside of the box on this. And I'm not trying to say that, the league's going to fold. But, I mean, if somebody has to get cut, I mean, there's going to be some different maybe approaches to these types of things that these coaches will also bring to the table. And, again, just using it from the mentor aspect, I'm sure there's some of these players that are going to meet these coaches this season that might have mutual relationships for years to come, and maybe even end up in a different league or in the same league or through those relationships as well. I know I'm going off on a tangent. I'm known to do that well. But I mean, overall, again, there's nobody in here. There's no one coaching here where I said, well, that's a bad pick. I like mentioning the Panthers earlier, kind of a different strategy there, maybe in smaller schools, maybe younger staff, whereas some of the other coaches, they're bringing in some more experience, and we'll have to see how that plays out on the field, right?
Right. I mean, I think that's the staff I'm looking forward to see what Jeff Fisher's got in store. Because I mean, like I said, Jeff Amamura, he was with him with the St. Louis to LA transition, but like otherwise, besides that, I mean, you got guys that I can tell right off the gate, haven't really collaborated with him directly in the NFL. I mean, for example, you have Eric Marty, who his last stint was with Grambling State. I just mentioned, his background is with several smaller colleges. His professional background was actually in the European and different European league settings, like Italian Football League, Austrian as well. Surprisingly, that's fascinating piece to look up. But this is definitely a guy kind of looking like an up and comer type of person that maybe Jeff has scouted out here. So I'm looking forward to seeing just what Jeff has in mind. Maybe he's looking at more of the modern day is how I look at it too. Perhaps that's what we're looking at here. Just kind of seeing what is more of a more modern style, what he can get from something that isn't just, it doesn't want to come up with a stale background, if you will.
Right.
So that's kind of my thing I'm looking at here. Another one, we got Quan Drake, who most recently was with the Kansas Jayhawks as one of the football assistants over there too. Another college guy coming up. So again, mixing up the staff a little bit. Not as many familiar guys. Like so, we talked like Mike Riley. Plenty of guys he has connections with. We also, for example, Todd Haley. A lot of guys he had connections with the NFL, Pittsburgh and Kansas City. His time's out there. So, a lot of familiar pieces, and that's a strategy I can understand completely. You want some guys you want to be able to lean on that are folks that can get your jobs done. I get that. I can understand that aspect to it. So, staff's really solidified. You can look into their backgrounds a bit more, and coaches are kind of taking what they can. One thing that, like I said, I was not entirely surprised to see, but all the consolidation of positions, it kind of just fits what the USFL is doing, kind of constraining a bit on how much you have in terms of personnel, how much you have in terms of players on your roster. If you're able to do those jobs and you're able to manage them well, that's kind of what they're doing. It does kind of cut some costs down too.
Oh, sure.
Put it that way, keeping that in mind.
And it's interesting to see the different strategies from the different coaches, right? Again, like you mentioned, some are just the head coach, some are sharing roles, and there's no like true consistency or a blueprint for how each of these coaches built their staffs, which just adds a new interesting element. Now, I think year 2, year 3, we might see some of these coaches nail in on a strategy, right? If you see one of these coaches and his staff is performing exceptionally well, you might say, well, maybe I'll borrow from that guy's configuration and maybe put the pieces together like that. So again, it adds a little bit of a different, interesting element. I don't necessarily, sure, yeah, in a perfect world, you would have as many coaches and players as you do in the NFL, but I don't knock them for it. I think, again, the extra element, a little bit of exciting factor of something different to look at because, more so than ever, at least with the USFL, the coaches are truly building their teams. They pick their rosters, they pick their coaching staffs, and they even, to a certain extent, pick the configuration of who does what and how they're doing it and how they're laying things out. And I'm signed up on that. I'm all right with that. Now, I think there is going to be a winning strategy and a losing strategy. So we'll see that play out through the season as well. But I think it's anyone's guess on which one is or isn't the winning strategy at this point.
You know who wins here today? The fans that get to read the rosters, because that's something. It's been a less minor thing people have been talking about, but there are some that they've been waiting to see. Like, okay, what are the official assistant coaches? What are the official coordinators? here you are.
Right.
Here's your research. You can do that now. And that's another, as we've talked, check off the box.
Yep. One more.
I mean, there's not really many more left. I mean, it's just that there are people that still, I've been surprised, that are like, hey, we got this and this and this. And I'm like, trust me, it's coming out.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, if you haven't gotten the confidence yet, you might just not be a fan of the league. I'm just being honest.
For sure.